Dan Bongino leaned intently toward the microphone today, stating with a calm deliberation that he intended to demonstrate that she was the most significant fabrication in the history of the Congress, delivering the words as dispassionately as if he were reading a meteorological report or stating a simple reality that everyone in the chamber would inevitably accept as truth. The House Oversight Committee hearing room descended into absolute stillness, with every camera lens, every reporter, and every staff member freezing in place, capturing the tension of the moment. Then, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez laughed, not with a nervous tremor, but with a performative chuckle, the specific kind she had likely rehearsed before mirrors, a laugh designed to convey that this man was beneath her notice, and one that played perfectly for the cameras. On Instagram clips, she thought to herself that this would be entertaining, leaning into her own microphone, while her $3,000 blazer caught the studio lighting at just the precise angle. Her team had selected that specific blazer for the cameras, and they had dedicated 45 minutes to her makeup that morning, ensuring this was destined to be her moment, another viral clip of her dismantling a Republican witness. A failed police officer turned podcast host is going to lecture me about fraud, she thought, pausing for dramatic effect while looking around the room with theatrical disbelief, asking if he was perhaps going to try and sell her gold coins or survival food for the apocalypse. Scattered laughter rippled from the Democratic side of the room, and a few staffers retrieved their phones to record what they assumed would be another signature Ocasio-Cortez takedown. She was entirely in her element now, for this was what she did best. This was her identity as the queen of the retort, the social media warrior, and the voice of a generation. Maybe you should restrict yourself to screaming into a microphone for angry boomers, she continued, suggesting he leave the substantive work to people who actually comprehend policy. More laughter followed, and a staffer signaled approval with a thumbs up. Yet Bongino did not move. He sat perfectly immobile, hands clasped on the table. He watched her performance with the disciplined patience of a man who had spent 12 years in the Secret Service, a man who had protected presidents and faced down genuine threats, learning the art of waiting. The laughter gradually faded, the silence stretched out comfortably, and Ocasio-Cortez's smile flickered for just a fraction of a second, as she was unaccustomed to opponents who offered no reaction, for she fed on reactions and required them. "Are you finished?" Bongino asked, his voice flat and thoroughly unimpressed. "I am just getting started, tough guy. You represent everything that is wrong with." Bongino reached down and unclasped his briefcase, the leather worn and practical, nothing ostentatious. "So am I." He retrieved a single folder, not thick or dramatic, just a plain manila file with a typed label on the front, and he set it on the table, positioning it precisely so every camera in the room could read the text. Ocasio-Cortez, the fraud. The room stirred as whispers rippled through the gallery. $47 million. Bongino let those words hang in the air, not rushing them, giving them ample space to breathe. That is the amount of money that flowed through your network of PACs, LLCs, and shell companies in 4 years, 47 million from people who believed in you. He opened the folder, declaring that he knew where every single penny went, every transfer, every payment, and every deception. He looked directly at her, his eyes steady and certain, stating that by the time he was done there today, everyone watching would know as well. He pulled out the first document, remarking that she should have remained a bartender, for at least that was an honest profession. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth to respond, to fire back, to do what she always did, but no words came out. For the first time in her political career, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had absolutely nothing to say, and Dan Bongino was only just beginning. Bongino flipped to the first section of the folder, moving with the methodical patience of a man who had built cases against drug cartels and protected presidents from assassins. Every gesture was deliberate, and every pause was calculated as he suggested they start with something simple: how she lived. Ocasio-Cortez rolled her eyes with practiced dismissiveness, muttering about the right-wing obsession with her clothes, calling it very original and creative. Not your clothes, Congresswoman, but your choices. The vast canyon between what you preach and how you actually live your life. He pulled out a document, a lease agreement, noting that she spoke frequently about affordable housing, calling it a human right, and claiming working families were being crushed by rent and forced to choose between food and shelter. He set the lease on the table, detailing her apartment in Navy Yard, Washington, D.C., costing $3,500 a month, a luxury building featuring a rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a 24-hour concierge. He looked up at her, stating that the rent alone was more than most families in her district earned in an entire month. Not their rent, but their total income from working 2 or 3 jobs. Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat, her posture changing slightly. It wasn't much, but the cameras caught the adjustment. She argued that this is standard for D.C. housing prices and that members of Congress need to maintain 2 residences. Do they? Bongino asked, pulling out another document, a spreadsheet with highlighted rows, presenting a list of available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol building. Plenty of options existed under $2,000, some under $1,500, modest places of the kind working people inhabit. He set the list down, noting that she did not want those. She wanted the luxury building, the one with amenities that most of her constituents will never experience, the one that costs more per month than some of them earn in 6 weeks of full-time labor. He paused, adding that there is nothing wrong with wanting nice things, nothing wrong with enjoying success, but there is something fundamentally wrong with building an entire political brand on telling other people they cannot have nice things while living in luxury oneself. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney leaned over and whispered something, but she waved him away with an irritated gesture. Bongino moved to the next exhibit, proposing they discuss the Green New Deal, her signature legislation, and the policy that made her a national figure. He pulled out a thick document, recalling how she stood on the floor of the House and declared climate change an existential threat, saying, "We have 12 years to act, or the world as we know it will end, and that every American needs to radically change how they live, travel, and consume." He pulled out a spreadsheet detailing 66 flights in 12 months, exposed in FAA records, every single one of them first class or business class. The room stirred, as he noted that her personal carbon footprint from air travel alone was larger than 20 average American families combined. 20 families in one single year. He set the spreadsheet down, stating that she wants working people to give up their cars and stop eating meat, effectively transforming their lives to save the planet. He looked at her, observing that first class is simply more comfortable, isn't it? Ocasio-Cortez grabbed her microphone, her voice pitched higher, insisting those were work-related flights for official congressional business. Were they? Bongino asked, pulling out a photograph and holding it up so every camera could see it clearly. Miami Beach, February 2021. While Texas was freezing and people were literally dying without power or heat, the photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in a bikini, champagne glass in hand, laughing on a beach cabana. "You flew to Florida for a fundraiser," he stated. A fundraiser at a beachfront mansion, while colleagues were organizing relief efforts and constituents in New York were dealing with their own winter weather emergencies. He set the photo down, noting that the image was posted by a friend of hers on Instagram and deleted within an hour when someone pointed out the optics. But nothing ever truly disappears from the internet. He pulled out another image, showing her 2 days later back in New York, tweeting about climate justice and the urgent need for the Green New Deal. He looked at her with something approaching pity, remarking that the champagne on the beach was nice, though. He was sure. Ocasio-Cortez's face flushed red, and her hands gripped the edge of the table as she stammered that it was a previously scheduled event. "Let's move on," Bongino interrupted, not interested in her explanations as he was building a case. "You champion defunding the police, claiming communities don't need armed officers patrolling their streets, and that money should go to social services, mental health workers, and community programs, anything but cops." He spread out a new set of documents detailing her personal security expenses for the last 2 years, exposed through financial disclosures that her office tried very hard to bury in paperwork. He pointed to the numbers, over $70,000 exposed right there in black and white. He looked at her, noting armed private security, trained professionals with guns, kept specifically to keep her safe, while she tells single mothers in the Bronx that they do not need police protection. "That is completely different," she argued, claiming she receives credible death threats. "So do they, Congresswoman." Bongino's voice hardened. "The single mother working the night shift at a bodega in your district, the elderly man walking home from church, the kids trying to get to school through gang territory. They face threats every single day. Real threats. Constant threats." He paused, emphasizing the difference is they cannot afford $70,000 in private security, and she wants to take away the only protection they have. The room was completely silent now. Even the clicking of keyboards had stopped. Bongino pulled out one more set of documents from this section regarding her staff, the people who work for her every day, the young idealists who believed in her message and wanted to be part of the movement. He read from an official filing regarding anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics, offering to read some highlights. He adjusted his reading glasses, quoting that the Congresswoman demands absolute loyalty, but treats staff like personal servants, where unpaid overtime is expected, and any complaints are met with threats about career consequences. He flipped to another page, quoting that she preaches about workers' rights on television but runs her own office like a sweatshop where interns work full-time hours with no compensation while she gives speeches about living wages. Another page quoted that there are 2 versions of her: the public one, who cares about working people, and the private one, who screams at junior staff for bringing the wrong coffee. He set the documents down, observing that the champion of the working class cannot even treat her own workers with basic human decency. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked as she argued those complaints were never substantiated and were anonymous accusations from disgruntled individuals. "They are sworn statements, Congresswoman, filed under penalty of perjury from people who worked for you, who believed in you, and who saw who you really are when the cameras aren't rolling." Bongino closed that section of the folder, remarking that living like a hypocrite is not actually a crime. It is just sad, just pathetic, and proof that she does not believe a single word of what she preaches. He opened the next section, where the pages were thicker and more dense, noting that this is where we get to the actual crimes. Bongino took a slow breath before continuing, for he understood pacing and how to build tension, knowing this was the section that would end careers. "Let's talk about money," he said. "Specifically, the $47 million that flowed through her political network in 4 years. He pulled out a complex diagram with lines connecting boxes, arrows showing flows of money, and names and organizations tangled together like a web. Brand New Congress PAC, Justice Democrats, Courage to Change PAC. 3 organizations all connected to her, all moving money in patterns that would make a professional money launderer jealous. Ocasio-Cortez forced a dismissive laugh, claiming those are legitimate political organizations that support progressive candidates. They were used to move money in circles until no one could trace where it actually went. Bongino countered, holding up the diagram to walk her through it step by step, simple enough for everyone watching at home to understand. He pointed to the first box. Donations come in to Brand New Congress, PAC, from small donors, working people who believed in the message about fighting corruption and representing the little guy, giving $20 or $50, whatever they could afford. Some skipping meals to donate. He traced a line on the chart, showing that money then gets paid to Brand New Congress LLC, a private limited liability company for campaign services, which sounds legitimate. Another line showed Brand New Congress LLC then pays a company called Middle Seat Consulting for more services. He looked up, asking if she wanted to guess who controls Middle Seat Consulting. Silence filled the room. Your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, the same man who founded Justice Democrats? The same man who recruited you to run for Congress in the first place? The man who discovered you at a casting call? Yes, a casting call for progressive candidates. Bongino set the diagram down, explaining the money goes in a circle from PAC to LLC to consulting firm and back into the pockets of her inner circle, while along the way, millions of dollars simply disappear into vague categories like operating expenses and consulting fees. He pulled out official filings, Federal Election Commission records, showing over $1 million in payments that cannot be properly accounted for. Where documentation is missing, services are undefined, and the money just vanished. He spread the papers out, noting the FEC has received multiple formal complaints about these arrangements and has been investigating for years, with the only reason charges haven't been filed being that the commission has been deadlocked along partisan lines. He looked at her, adding that the FBI does not have that problem and they have been looking at this very carefully. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney was writing furiously on a legal pad, looking pale. Let's talk about something more specific, Bongino continued, bringing up her boyfriend. The room went very still, for this was personal now. Riley Roberts, her longtime partner, by all accounts a nice enough guy, not a political operative, not a campaign strategist, not a communications expert, but someone with a background in web development. He set down payment records showing her campaign and associated PACs paid Riley Roberts $6,000 a month, every month for over a year for marketing consulting. He did the math out loud. That is more than $72,000 from donor money for marketing consulting. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez asking what he produced, what campaigns he created, what marketing strategies he developed, and what deliverables exist with his name on them. The silence stretched. I will answer for you, Congresswoman. Nothing. There is no portfolio, no documented work product, no evidence that he did anything at all to earn that money, just checks written to your boyfriend from funds donated by working people who thought they were supporting a political movement. Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose defensively, claiming Riley provided valuable digital strategy and ongoing consultation. Then, show me. Bongino's voice cut through her explanation. Show this committee one single piece of work he produced, one strategy document, one campaign creative, one email chain discussing deliverables, one anything. She didn't respond. I have reviewed every filing, every document your campaign produced, and his name appears only on payment records, never on any actual work product. He pulled out another piece of paper, noting that here is where it gets really interesting, and proceeded to tell her about Maria Gonzalez. He paused, letting the name settle into the room. Maria Gonzalez is a single mother of two living in the Bronx in her district, the district she claims to represent and fight for. He set down a printed statement explaining that Maria works 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings downtown at night and working at a laundromat folding other people's clothes during the day, making about $14 an hour when averaged out, with no benefits, no sick days, and no vacation. He looked at the document, noting that in 2018, Maria donated $50 to her campaign. That $50 represented a full day's wages for her, and she had to skip buying groceries that week to afford it. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez, stating that Maria believed in her, watched her videos, and saw someone who looked like her, who talked about struggles like hers, and who promised to fight for people the system had forgotten. He tapped the payment record for Riley Roberts, pointing out that Maria's $50 helped pay her boyfriend $6,000 a month to produce nothing. His voice dropped lower as he said Maria skipped meals so her kids could eat that week, and her donation went to subsidize her boyfriend's lifestyle. Ocasio-Cortez blinked rapidly, her eyes getting wet. Whether from emotion or calculation, it was hard to tell, stammering that this was a gross mischaracterization of how campaign finance works. "Is it?" Bongino asked, pulling out an email printout to read something from her personal account to Saikat Chakrabarti, dated March 15th, 2019. He read slowly, making sure every word was captured by the microphones. Make sure the transfers don't look connected. Use different entity names for each step. The small donors can never find out who's really benefiting from their money. Keep it clean on paper. He set the email down on the table, declaring that is not staff making accounting errors, that is not confusion about complicated campaign finance regulations, that is her personally and directly instructing her chief of staff to hide where the money was going. A Democratic member of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and the ranking member was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "You told Maria Gonzalez and thousands of donors just like her that their money was funding a movement, a revolution, a fight for the working class against the corrupt establishment." Bongino's voice hardened as he stated it was funding her inner circle, her boyfriend, her political operatives, and her personal lifestyle. He pulled out one final document from this section showing the total amount of donor money that went directly to entities controlled by her, her boyfriend, or her close personal associates, based on FEC filings and corporate registry records, $4.2 million. He let that number sit in the air. $4.2 million from people like Maria Gonzalez, from people who sacrificed for her, who believed she was different from every other politician. He closed that section of the folder, noting that is just the money we can trace to American donors, but not all the money came from Americans. He opened the next section, warning that this is where the story gets really dark. Bongino turned to a new tab in the folder, a section that had photographs clipped to the top, images that had shaped history. June 24th, 2018, he began. A date that transformed her entire career and made her a national figure. He held up the famous photograph every person in America had seen. Ocasio-Cortez at the border fence in Texas, hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, the image of compassion confronting cruelty. This image went viral within hours, was shared millions of times, launched 1,000 news segments and magazine covers, and turned her from a long-shot primary challenger into a national icon. He set it down gently, almost reverently. A young Latina congresswoman overcome with emotion at the sight of immigrant children separated from their parents. It was powerful, moving, and exactly what the moment needed. He paused, noting there was just one problem with that narrative. He held up another photograph taken 5 minutes before the famous shot at the same location, on the same day, by the same photographer who kept all his images and was kind enough to share the complete sequence with federal investigators. The second photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in the same white outfit at the same fence. But she wasn't crying. She was laughing with her staff, checking her makeup in a phone screen and adjusting her hair for the cameras. And this one was taken 12 minutes after the crying photo. showing a third image of Ocasio-Cortez smiling broadly, posing for selfies with supporters. Not a tear in sight, her makeup fresh and perfect. Your grief lasted exactly as long as it needed to for the photographers to get the shot, approximately 5 minutes, sandwiched between smiles and selfies. Ocasio-Cortez shook her head vigorously, her voice rising as she claimed those photos were completely taken out of context, and she was genuinely overwhelmed by what she saw. "Were you?" Bongino asked, pulling out a text message log from her communications director that morning, sent 3 hours before she arrived at the facility. He read from the printout. "Make sure photographers are positioned at the fence before she arrives. We need the emotion shot. Have tissues ready in case she needs them. Tell her to think about something sad if she needs to get the tears going." He set it down, repeating the emotion shot, noting that is what her team called it. Not a genuine moment of human compassion, but a shot, a performance, something to be manufactured and captured for maximum political impact. He pulled out another text exchange, this one from her sent to her campaign manager 2 hours after the photos were taken, reading, "The crying pic is blowing up everywhere. This is going to be massive for fundraising. Get the donation page ready. We need to capitalize before the news cycle moves on." His voice dropped lower and harder as he stated the children in those facilities were real. Their fear was real. Their confusion about being separated from their parents was real. And their suffering was real. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez, accusing her of using them as props for a fundraising email. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion, as she claimed she cares deeply about those children and has fought tirelessly for immigration reform. "Have you?" Bongino asked, pulling out a calendar document showing her official congressional schedule for the 2 years following that famous photograph. "Let's count how many times you visited a border facility to actually engage with the issue." He flipped through the pages, revealing the answer is 0. Not once. You never went back. The photo op was enough. He pulled out more documents, noting she did find time to do 427 media interviews about the border, found time for magazine photo shoots and documentary appearances, and found time to raise $11.3 million off immigration-related appeals. He set the papers down, observing she just never found time to actually go back and do anything substantive about the problem. He spread out printouts of her social media posts, where she called those facilities concentration camps, compared Border Patrol agents to Nazi guards, and said America was operating a system of state-sponsored terror against brown children. He looked at her, calling them strong words, inflammatory words, words designed to generate maximum outrage and maximum donations. He pulled out a different document, noting they were words that also put targets on the backs of federal agents trying to do an impossible job. He read from an incident report stating 3 Border Patrol agents were physically assaulted by protesters who cited her rhetoric as justification, one of whom, Agent Manuel Padilla, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. He has a wife and 3 young children who spent those 2 weeks wondering if their father would ever be the same. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, but for once, nothing came out. You got your headlines. Agent Padilla got brain damage and broken bones. Bongino moved to the next page, proposing they examine what she actually did for immigration policy. Not the tweets or Instagram stories, but the actual legislative work. He held up a thin document representing every piece of immigration-related legislation she had sponsored in 4 years in Congress. He flipped through the pages slowly. Resolutions, non-binding statements, symbolic gestures, press release material designed to generate social media engagement. He set it down, noting not a single substantive bill became law. Not one policy change actually helped a single immigrant family. Just performance. He pulled out financial records, observing that while she was performing outrage, something interesting was happening with her fundraising. He spread out the documents showing open border advocacy groups and organizations pushing for abolishing and ending all deportations, donated heavily to her PACs after that photo went viral. He pointed to specific line items, noting some of these organizations have been flagged by law enforcement for concerning connections, money flows that trace back through several layers to people who profit from chaos at the border. Ocasio-Cortez slammed her hand on the table, declaring that an outrageous and racist insinuation. "Is it?" Bongino asked, holding up a Department of Homeland Security report from an ongoing investigation into funding networks for organizations that actively work to undermine border security. "Your PACs received donations from 3 groups specifically named in this report." He set it down, asking if she checked where the money came from or did any due diligence at all. Silence followed. "You just cashed the checks and kept performing." He leaned forward slightly, stating that every year thousands of migrants die crossing the desert because they were told the border was open, and America was waiting with welcome arms. Women are assaulted, children are trafficked, and families pay their entire life savings to criminal organizations who leave them to die in the heat. His voice was hard now, no longer professorial, something closer to anger, accusing her of profiting from the chaos and fundraising off the suffering, building her political brand on the bodies of people she claims to care about. He closed that section, remarking that exploiting immigrants for donations and social media engagement isn't even the worst thing she has done. He opened the next section of the folder, the final major section, stating the worst thing is what she really thinks about the people who actually voted for her, the people who believed she was one of them. Bongino paused before opening this section, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming quieter, almost sad. "This is the part that is going to hurt the most," he said, clarifying not for her, as she already knows what is in there, because she lived it. He looked toward the gallery and the cameras, stating, "This is going to hurt the people watching at home, the people who believed in her and saw her as a symbol of hope." He opened the folder to start with Amazon. Ocasio-Cortez visibly stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. In 2019, Amazon announced plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, her district. He pulled out economic projections showing 25,000 jobs, not minimum wage jobs, but professional positions with an average salary of $150,000 per year. Direct investment of over $2 billion into her community and tax revenue that would have funded schools and infrastructure for decades. He spread out news clippings from that time, showing she led the opposition, organized protests, called it corporate welfare, and said the tax incentives were a giveaway to a billionaire who didn't need help. He pulled out a statement from Amazon showing it worked. Amazon pulled out, took those 25,000 jobs somewhere else, and invested those billions of dollars in a different community. He looked at her, noting she celebrated and called it a victory for the people, and her supporters cheered. He paused, asking a victory for which people exactly. He pulled out an email from her personal account, sent to a major donor 1 week after Amazon announced they were withdrawing. He read slowly and carefully. The Amazon thing worked out even better than we expected. Those tech workers would have completely gentrified the district within 5 years. They would have voted for centrist Democrats, or even Republicans. Better to keep the current voter base in place. Poor people who depend on government programs are reliable voters for us. That's our base. That's our path to power. The hearing room was absolutely silent. No one moved. "You didn't kill those 25,000 jobs because of principle?" Bongino said slowly. You killed them because financially secure, well-educated voters might not need you anymore. He set the email down, emphasizing 25,000 families, 25,000 chances for working people in her district to build wealth, buy homes, send their kids to good colleges, and achieve the American dream she claims to fight for. He looked at her, stating she killed it deliberately because their success would have threatened her political power. Ocasio-Cortez was shaking now, her voice coming out strangled, insisting that email was not what she meant and was being taken completely out of context. "What did you mean then?" he asked, demanding she explain it and tell the people in her district what she meant when she said it is better to keep them poor and dependent. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Bongino pulled out phone records, noting Amazon was cold calculation and political strategy. But this next part is personal. This is what she really thinks about the people who trusted her. He held up a thick printout of text messages from her personal cell phone, obtained legally through a warrant, issued as part of an ongoing federal investigation into campaign finance violations. He found a specific page dated the 15th of March 2021, a text message to a college friend from her Boston University days. He read slowly, letting each word land. These Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. Just say the word socialism a few times and throw in some Spanish phrases, and they cheer like trained seals. Gasps erupted from the gallery, and a staffer walked out of the room. Bongino continued with the same conversation 2 minutes later. "They'll vote for me, literally, no matter what I do. They're not smart enough to realize when they're being played. All I have to do is say I'm fighting for them, and they believe it." More gasps followed, and someone in the gallery was crying. And then this one. "The Bronx is basically just my brand at this point. Like a logo I own. I would never in a million years actually live there again. Can you imagine?" He set the phone records down, stating those are her words, her private thoughts written to a friend when she thought no one would ever see them, when she felt safe enough to say what she actually believes. Ocasio-Cortez's voice was barely a whisper, broken, claiming those texts were taken completely out of context, and she was venting about pressures. "What context makes it acceptable to call your voters trained seals?" he asked. "Silence. What context makes it okay to say they are too stupid to know when they are being played?" More silence. "What context makes calling your district just a brand, that you own anything other than contempt for the people who elected you?" Bongino didn't wait for an answer, stating there is no context that makes any of that acceptable. There is just her saying what she really believes when she thought she was safe. He pulled out more documents to talk about who she actually employs and trusts to serve her constituents. He spread out personnel records of 14 full-time staffers in her congressional office, noting he went through their backgrounds, resumes, and histories. He pointed to the data showing 12 of them are from out of state, having moved to New York to work for her. 10 have Ivy League degrees, and only 2 actually grew up in her district. Only 2 are actually from the community she claims to represent. He looked at her, mocking the champion of the working-class Bronx, who cannot find qualified workers from the Bronx. He pulled out another document regarding her Hispanic outreach coordinator, the person responsible for connecting her with the Latino community, who was raised in suburban Connecticut, attended Yale, and doesn't speak fluent Spanish. He set it down, noting she had the right family connections and knew the right people from the right schools. He pulled out more employment records, observing meanwhile there are young people in her district who would give anything for a chance to work in Congress. Kids who grew up in the Bronx, went to public schools, and actually know the community. He shook his head, stating she never gave them a chance because they didn't have the right credentials or pedigrees. Bongino pulled out one more piece of evidence, suggesting they speak of her connection to the community, specifically her heritage and identity. Ocasio-Cortez tensed visibly. You present yourself as a Latina from the Bronx, a daughter of the working class, a woman connected to her Puerto Rican roots. He pulled out a transcript from a Univision interview last year, where she attempted to answer several questions in Spanish, and read what a professional linguist who reviewed the tape had to say. The analysis stated, "The subject speaks Spanish at approximately an intermediate tourist level. Her pronunciation is heavily Americanized. Her grammar is consistently incorrect in ways that a native speaker raised in a Spanish-speaking household would never make. The errors suggest someone who learned Spanish as a second language in school, rather than at home." He set it down, accusing her of performing being Latina for the cameras, using Spanish phrases as props, while never really having the actual language, culture, or connection to the community. Ocasio-Cortez was crying now, tears cutting lines through her makeup, mascara running, insisting her family is Puerto Rican, and she is Puerto Rican, calling this a racist attack on her identity. It is not an attack on Puerto Ricans, Congresswoman. It is an observation about you specifically, about the gap between the identity you perform and the person you actually are. Bongino's voice softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with something closer to pity. You grew up in Yorktown Heights. Median household income, $96,000 a year, one of the wealthier suburbs in New York, with nice houses, good schools, safe streets, and country clubs nearby. He paused, noting there is nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having a comfortable childhood or being fortunate. He looked at her, stating, "But that is not the story she tells, is it? She tells people she is from the Bronx, from the struggle, from the streets, because that story sells better, gets donations, and wins elections." He shook his head slowly, accusing her of stealing the identity of her own community, appropriating their struggle, their story, and their pain to advance her career, and in private, laughing at them for being stupid enough to believe her. He closed the folder, declaring, "That is not democratic socialism. That is not fighting for the working class. That is just fraud, plain and simple fraud." The hearing room felt different now. The energy had shifted completely, and the confident arena of political theater had become something else, something quieter and sadder. Ocasio-Cortez sat slumped in her chair, her makeup ruined. The polished warrior who had walked in that morning replaced by something smaller and broken. "I want to respond," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I have the right to respond to these accusations." Chairman James nodded, stating the witness had concluded his testimony and the Congresswoman may make a statement. Ocasio-Cortez straightened in her chair, tried to find the fire that had always come so naturally before, and tried to summon the fighter who had never backed down. "This is a political witch hunt," she began, her voice cracking but pushing through, calling it a coordinated attack by right-wing forces who are terrified of strong progressive women. She claimed every piece of so-called evidence presented today had been taken out of context, twisted, manipulated, and weaponized by people who want to silence the voice of working people in this country. She looked at the cameras, tried to find her audience, saying they are afraid of us, afraid of a movement that threatens their grip on power, so they dig through emails and private lives looking for scandals. Her voice gained some strength as she declared she would not be silenced, intimidated, or apologize for fighting for the people who need a champion in Washington. She turned to face Bongino directly, calling him a failed cop who couldn't cut it in law enforcement, a conspiracy theorist who peddles nonsense to angry people for money, and a puppet for billionaires who want to crush the dreams of ordinary Americans. She lifted her chin, stating, "Nothing he said there today changes who she is or what she stands for." The room waited. Bongino slowly reached back into his briefcase, asked if she was done, and pulled out one final document, because he had something else she should see. He set it on the table, explaining, "This is a cooperation agreement signed 6 months ago by Saikat Chakrabarti, her former chief of staff, the man who built her entire political operation from the ground up." The color drained completely from Ocasio-Cortez's face. "He has been talking to federal investigators for half a year, provided the emails, financial records, and text messages. Everything presented today came from the man who knows exactly how the operation worked, because he helped build it." Bongino pulled out another document, stating her boyfriend, Riley Roberts, has been interviewed twice by the FBI, and provided detailed records of every payment he received and exactly what he did to earn them, which was nothing. Another document showed 4 former staff members have given sworn statements about the working conditions in her office, the unpaid overtime, verbal abuse, and threats against anyone who complained. He spread them all across the table, noting she called this a witch hunt, but witch hunts chase imaginary enemies, whereas the evidence against her is documented, corroborated, and real. Ocasio-Cortez turned desperately to her colleagues, the other members of the squad, the women who had stood beside her through every controversy and defended her against every attack. Ilhan, Rashida, Ayana, pleading that they know this is political persecution and asking them to say something. Silence. Representative Omar studied her notes intently. Representative Clyde was suddenly fascinated by something on her phone, and Representative Presley looked away, out toward the gallery, at nothing in particular. No one spoke. "They are not coming to rescue you," Bongino said quietly, explaining they have known this was coming for weeks, that they made sure they knew, and they have already made their choices. He pulled out printed statements, showing Representative Omar released one 45 minutes ago, stating she has no knowledge of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial arrangements and cannot speak to any ongoing investigation. Another paper showed Representative Tlaib released a statement that morning, saying each congressional office is responsible for its own compliance with campaign finance regulations and wishing her colleague well during this difficult period. Another noted Representative Presley hadn't released a formal statement, but unfollowed her on all social media platforms yesterday and deleted every photograph featuring both of them from the last 3 years. He set the papers down, observing they saw the evidence, calculated the odds, and chose to save themselves. Ocasio-Cortez looked around the room with growing desperation at her staff, who wouldn't meet her eyes, at her colleagues finding reasons to be anywhere else, and at the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of her collapse. She was utterly alone. "This isn't fair," she whispered, the words coming out broken like a child's. "I was trying to help people, trying to change things, trying to make a difference." Bongino's voice was not cruel when he responded. It was tired, disappointed. "Maybe you were once, at the beginning. Maybe there was a version of you who actually believed the things you said." He closed his briefcase, suggesting that somewhere along the way she started believing she was special, that the rules didn't apply to her, that she was too important to be held accountable, and that the people who supported her were tools to be used rather than citizens to be served. He looked at her with something that might have been pity, stating he didn't think she was evil, but rather, what happens when someone gets famous too fast, gets too much power too young? "I think you got lost somewhere between your first viral tweet and your 50th magazine cover." He stood up, adding, "That doesn't undo the damage, doesn't give back the money, doesn't unbreak the trust, and doesn't help the people she hurt." Chairman James cleared his throat and addressed the room formally, stating the committee had heard extensive testimony and examined substantial evidence regarding potential violations of federal campaign finance law, wire fraud statutes, and congressional ethics standards. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, directing committee staff to prepare a formal referral to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation based on the proceedings, and additionally recommending that the House Ethics Committee open its own investigation immediately. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez, strongly advising her to retain experienced legal counsel, and declared the hearing adjourned, bringing the gavel down with a sharp crack. Ocasio-Cortez tried to stand, but her legs didn't cooperate. She grabbed the table for support, knuckles white against the wood. Her staff rushed over to help, but she pushed them away with trembling hands, insisting she could walk out of there herself. She made it 3 steps toward the door before the wall of camera flashes started. A blinding storm of light and noise, reporters shouting questions from every direction. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Do you have a response to the text messages? What do you say to the donors who trusted you? Will you cooperate with the federal investigation?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Words had always been her weapon. But now, they had abandoned her completely. The door closed behind her. The cameras kept flashing, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was already gone. Her career didn't end with handcuffs or a dramatic confrontation. It ended with silence and closed doors, and somehow that was worse. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 1 hour, the video clips were everywhere. Social media exploded with reaction, and within 2 hours, every cable network had cleared their regular programming for continuous coverage. Within 3 hours, the first calls for resignation came from members of her own party. Quiet calls, careful calls, but calls nonetheless. In the Bronx, the reaction was different from the political chatter in Washington. Maria Gonzalez sat in her small apartment that evening, watching the news coverage on a television she couldn't afford to replace. The screen old and fuzzy, but the images clear enough. In her weathered hands, she held a donation receipt from 2018 for $50, a full day's wages from years ago when she had believed. A local reporter had found her somehow, knocked on her door with a camera crew looking for the human story behind the numbers. "I believed in her," Maria said quietly, her English accented but clear, having practiced these words in her head all afternoon. "I told my daughters to look at this woman, that she looks like us, talks about our struggles, came from nothing, and now is in Congress fighting for people like us." She looked down at the faded receipt, saying she told her girls that if they worked hard and stayed honest, maybe they could do something important too. Maybe they could change things. The tears came slowly as she recalled skipping groceries that week to send that money, telling herself it was an investment in their future, in their community, in someone who understood. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, remarking that she called us stupid, said we were easy to manipulate, and laughed at us with her rich friends. The reporter asked what she wanted to say to Ocasio-Cortez. Maria thought for a long moment before answering that she wanted to say she broke something important, not just trust, but something bigger. She made people like me afraid to believe in anyone ever again. She looked at the donation receipt one more time, stating that is the worst part, not the $50 she can earn back, but the hope she stole. I don't know how to get that back. Across the district, similar scenes played out through the evening and into the night in bodegas and laundromats, in crowded apartments where multiple families shared small spaces, and in late-night diners where working people grabbed meals between shifts. People who had believed watched their faith collapse in real time. They had given her their votes, their money, their hope, and their dreams for something better, and she had given them a performance. Dan Bongino did one interview that evening, only one, turning down the others. The reporter asked if he was proud of what he had accomplished. Bongino shook his head slowly, saying, "Proud isn't the right word for any of this, as there is nothing here to be proud of." He paused, choosing his words carefully. stating a young woman destroyed her own career through arrogance and greed, and thousands of people who believed in her feel betrayed tonight. Her district still doesn't have the 25,000 jobs she killed, and the immigrant families she used as props are still suffering at the border. He looked directly at the camera, stating he didn't create this situation, he just exposed it, presented evidence, and let people draw their own conclusions. The reporter asked if he felt any sympathy for Ocasio-Cortez. Bongino thought about it before answering that he felt sympathy for who she could have been, noting she had real gifts, intelligence, charisma, the ability to connect with people and inspire them. If she had used those gifts honestly, she might have actually accomplished something meaningful. He shook his head, noting she made different choices, and those choices led here. Later that night, Dan Bongino sat alone in his home office, the television off, his phone silenced, the folder that had contained his evidence now filed away, its contents in the hands of federal investigators. He thought about the young woman who had walked into Congress 4 years ago, having watched her rise like everyone else, seen the fire in her eyes and the certainty in her voice, 29 years old, and absolutely sure she was going to change the world. Somewhere along the way, she had started making choices, small ones. At first, probably, a donor not questioned too closely, an expense report fudged slightly, a private text message that said what she really thought. Until the small compromises became big ones, until the lies grew too heavy to carry, until the person she performed on camera had nothing in common with who she actually was in private. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor at the bureau. New file on your desk tomorrow. Different name? Same pattern? Bongino read the message twice, then set his phone down, realizing there was always another one. Always another politician who believed they were above the rules, another true believer who traded their principles for power and comfort, another promise broken to the people who could least afford broken promises. He filed the folder away in his cabinet with the others, then turned off the light and headed home to his family. Tomorrow the work would continue. It always did. 3 days later, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez submitted her resignation from Congress. The letter was brief, citing a need to focus on personal matters and spend time with family. It did not admit to any wrongdoing, did not apologize to her donors, and did not acknowledge the people she had called stupid and easy to manipulate. The investigation continued without her. Subpoenas were issued, grand juries were convened, and the wheels of justice, slow but grinding, began to turn. In the Bronx, life went on. Maria Gonzalez went back to work at the laundromat the morning after the hearing, having bills to pay and children to feed, with no time for grief over broken political dreams. But she took down the poster she had kept on her wall, the one with Ocasio-Cortez's face and the slogan about fighting for working families. She folded it carefully and put it in the trash, accepting the somber truth that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired.